This is the 12th chapter of Converging Media, Media Theory and Research. Now, the book gets into this a fair amount, and we're going to some extent. Talks about the role of theory and research. It really has, the theories set the research agenda. And of course, research findings sometimes shape public policies on the media. It also can help media research help determine how many people are watching, which campaigns are more effective and more persuasive. And so those are big things. Those are very, very important things that get researched in mass media. If you get into research and doing mass media research, it can be a good job as well. It talks about mass communication and mass society. There have been a lot of things that have happened where there's more of the ability to affect the culture, get involved in the culture that we live in, because of the way the digital convergence, especially. It's put a TV studio in your hand. My sister-in-law has a channel on Etsy. She receives hundreds of dollars a month from Etsy because she has so many people that watch her explain how to do pottery. She does her entire thing from her iPhone. She shoots it from her iPhone. And again, she's making a lot of money doing that. If you can go online and say things that are interesting, a lot of people want to come watch you, you can make a lot of money. The elites are threatened by these developments. There's a notion that people who are considered the elites have of the masses. They are considered, obviously I don't feel this way, they're considered uneducated, lacking in culture, not intelligent enough to rule themselves. There are those who oppose this elitist attitude that say that more participation, better education, greater distribution of wealth creates a more democratic and just society. And that those two different ways that we've approached it, most of our culture believes in this more democratic society. Media effects research is huge. There's this book has said this before, and I've disagreed with it already, but I'll say it again. I'll disagree with it again. It talks about propaganda, total control of the transmission of information. Many dictatorships have a propaganda machine. That's what they have. The government controls what the media can say. There is the hypodermic needle model that assumes that messages have a profound, direct, and uniform impact on individuals. That has been disproven. That is true. However, the fact that it has a direct effects on people has not been disproven. If there were no direct effects on people using mass communication, why would anybody in their right mind pay money to advertise on radio, television, or anything else? Talks about how radio expanded, became a huge thing in our culture. I'm not going to get into all that. You can read all of that in your book. Television and violence, they did studies. Again, if there's no direct effects of mass media, then why is this true? There was a thing called the Bobo doll studies. What they did was they showed children, they showed episodes that rewarded a violent person were more likely to punch a Bobo doll than children who saw episodes that punished a violent person. Again, please don't tell me there's no effect of the media on us. There is, and there are very direct effects. So that's an example right there. There is evidence that it suggests that some of the violence on television may have caused more of the violence in our society. There's some that says it doesn't. The accumulated research, however, demonstrates a correlation between viewing violence and aggressive behavior. No direct effects? Well, children and adults who watch a large number of aggressive programs also tend to hold attitudes and values that favor the use of violence. Again, this is long established research. It's accumulated research. What they did is there were some individual studies that said, oh, it doesn't do this. It doesn't affect us like that. You're watching violent stuff doesn't make us more violent. Then there were some that said, oh, yes, it does. Yes, it does. What some researchers did, they took a lot of this research and put it together to find a cumulative body of research. What does it say about it? And you know what it said about it? It said that people who watch more aggressive, more violent programming hold attitudes and values that favor the use of violence. Go figure. They do talk about limited effects. There are some things that get in the way of media effects. A theory of media effects that cultivates analysis. A theory of media effects that claims television cultivates in audiences a view of reality similar to the world portrayed in the television programs. So now this is, and we have been in class. I don't know if I mentioned this in the past, but they've done the studies that show the more shows you watch about violence and law and order and criminals and things like that, the more skewed your perception becomes of how likely you are to be a victim of violent crime. Go in a different direction. The more health related, the more like emergency rooms, ER, or I don't know, there's a lot of other TV shows on that deal with medicine and hospitals and things like this. They found that the more of those shows that you watch, the more skewed or inaccurate your perception is that you're a certain amount likely to develop this, that, or the other, cancer, or this disease, or that disease. You develop a skewed perception of it. There is another study called the Mean World Syndrome. It's a syndrome in which people perceive the world as more dangerous than it is as a result of viewing countless acts of media violence. We just talked about that. It talks about the spiral of silence on page 365 of the book. The spiral of silence is a idea explains why people may be unwilling to publicly express opinions they feel are in the minority. People have a fear of isolation. They're reluctant to then express those views because they feel they're in the minority. And it allows people, there's also a sixth sense that sort of allows people to gauge the prevailing climate of opinion. It's just like in the media, and a lot of the media in this last election, CNN, MSNBC, and some of the networks, there were a lot of negative things. There was almost like a campaign that they did for Joe Biden. They did. And Fox News, of course, did the same thing, except for in favor of President Donald Trump. Well, there are questions now about why people don't respond accurately to polls. Well, there are reasons for that. Again, people sometimes are hesitant to express an opinion they feel is in the minority. So if someone is a supporter of Donald Trump, let's say there are 1,000 people say, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump, and then they do a poll. The research suggests that a percentage of those people are not going to respond, yes, I'm voting for Donald Trump. Yes, I have a good opinion of him. Yes, I have a high opinion of him. There are those who are going to say, oh, no, I vote for Joe Biden, which might tell us why the polls in both the 2016 election and in this election were so inaccurate in regard to, in the poll in 2016, suggesting that Hillary Clinton was going to win, just easily win the election, and she lost. And in this one, there were some polls that indicated a potential landslide in favor of Joe Biden. Didn't happen. He won, and it looks like right now, it looks like he won fairly easily, but it didn't happen in a landslide. The third person effect, tendency for people to underestimate the effects of a persuasive message on them while overestimating the effect on others. I watch lots of TV, I can watch violent things, and it doesn't affect me. However, I think a lot of those other people out there are becoming violent. I think they're watching too much violent TV. Really? Well, why is it that the language of our culture has changed? Why is it that people have taken up the use of words they didn't learn them as a kid, they didn't hear them out of their parents' mouths, and yet they come out and they start using all kinds of words, F words, other things like that, and it's okay all of a sudden? It's a very strange thing. I've been teaching for 25 years. I started in 93. I had a little gap in there, but I've been teaching for the better part of 26, 27 years. I've been teaching, and the language in class has changed. Now students will occasionally let out a word. They need to let out. And they look at me and go, oh, sorry. If you constantly consume things on television that have bad language in it, there are studies that suggest you will pick that up. All right, some criticisms of media effect research. You can go through that. That's argument, that where people say, does it work as well as everybody thinks it does? Well, again, if it doesn't, why is there so much advertising? Understanding the audience. They talk about audiences creating meaning. Uses and gratification research basically says people have certain needs. They've satisfied those needs through media usage, and they use the media in the way they want to. They know what they actively watch TV for their own purposes. They know these purposes and can articulate them. And even though there are differences in why people use media, there are common patterns that do exist among people. And what they really study is how people use media and how they use it in some way to gratify their own needs. I've watched television programs that I've watched and not agreed with. and I feel free to talk back to the TV. Well, that uses gratifications. People would say, well, he's a conservative, but he watches CNN, and sometimes he talks back to the TV. And he also doesn't agree with everything Fox News says, and he watches that, and sometimes he talks back to the TV there. And maybe it's because he needs a place to find his voice and express himself, uses and gratification. Talks about encoding and decoding model. There are different ways you can encode or decode any message. You can choose the dominant or hegemonic reading, or you can do what's called oppositional reading, where you take the opposite value out of it. You can also do a negotiated reading. You accept the dominant meaning to some extent, but there are variations that you take out of it. Reception analysis assumes the audience actively makes meaning from the media they consume, and they look at how they receive it and how they make meaning of it. It also looks a little bit at culture and social patterns of media production and power relations between different groups. The book talks about framing next. Framing, presentation of messages, colors presentation of it. We use frames to make sense of our world in which we live. We have certain filters, help us categorize and understand our social reality. And they emerge through our daily interactions with the media, and they're shaped by our culture and social norms and our values. So that's how someone watches a TV show and says, well, that was a good TV show, it's good values on it, I like that show. And then others watch the show and say, well, that's a terrible show, terrible values. I showed my mass communication class, and of course, if we had been in class, we'd have done more of this. I showed up a comedy show. I said, I want you to remember, as you watch television, as you watch comedies, representation constitutes legitimization, and legitimization constitutes normalization. Normalization constitutes legitimization and ultimately endorsement. So if something is represented on the television, it's represented in a way, any representation of it makes it more acceptable to the viewer. They did studies that found that whatever we laugh at on TV makes it more acceptable to us. Well, we watched the pilot episode of Mom, of the TV show Mom, and as we watch it, and students in the class had seen it, but as we watched it, we were laughing and everything. We got done, and one of the students said, I feel bad now because I know I laughed at some things. I laughed at some values I don't think I should have laughed at, because if it makes it more acceptable to me, then that's problematic. There was drugs, marijuana, teen pregnancy, children treating their parents disrespectfully. There was adultery. There was cheating, affairs, people having an affair with someone, and people cheating with a married man. There's just a lot of different things within this show in the very first episode that, okay, funny, and people laughed. But as I said, this one lady said, I feel bad about laughing now. Anyway, let's go forward. In this chapter, talks about cultural studies. They examine how meaning is produced not only among audiences, but also among media producers. They take a critical eye toward issues of power, dominance, and subordination. The media presents things in a certain way, and it normalizes that way. Whatever way it presents it, it normalizes it, makes it okay. This is okay. Well, that's fine. What if you're not within the realm? Your life doesn't fit within the realm of sort of the normal. In postmodernism, they talk about marginalization, where groups are left out and not represented. They become marginalized. Critical theory is an idea of the role where it examines. It's influenced by a role of ideology, exploitation, capitalism, the economy, and understanding, eventually transforming society. The culture industry looks at how media businesses create mass-produced cultural products that are then consumed by the masses, and of course, and that affects the culture. It affects the people that consume it. With ideology is when we talk about ideology in the media, we talk about the fact that the culture industry oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, propagates the status quo. The way things are fine, so it tends to promote that. I talked about different other frameworks that you can look at. I'm going to go into all of this. If you get into a mass comm bachelor's or even a master's or doctorate later, you'll look at a lot of this. We live in an information society is one of the things it talks about. There's a prominence of communication and media is ushered in a new area that breaks drastically from the industrial society. We don't necessarily live in an industrial world. There are many countries that are more industrial. The United States is a little less industrial than it used to be. That's been problematic at times. Talked about the digital divide, where there's a higher the economically advantaged have better access to the internet and things along that line. Talked about political economy. They examine production and ownership of media that determines our media environment and affects our social and political systems. Going forward to the next page, talked about media ecology. Examines how our media environments influence our thinking and how specific types of media affect our perceptions. See, again, this is out there. The research has been done. They know it does this. And so you cannot say there's not a direct effect. I'm not going to get into the technological determinism. I don't necessarily believe that's true. It says technology actually causes human behaviors. I think we're still responsible. No matter what it is we watch, we're still responsible for our own behavior, our own language, the way we treat other people. Talks about agenda setting. The media, by showing something on the TV even, confers status on it. And it sets the agenda of how we think about things. And whether we even, if it's not represented, then we're not going to think about it. It's not there, no one's talking about it, then we're not going to think about it. Where if it's talked about, represented, then it's there, then we're thinking about it, maybe we're talking about it. It sort of sets the agenda even for our own conversations at times. Some new directions in media research. They've done longitudinal studies where they study people over a long period of time. And by the way, in case you think that I'm wrong on the direct effects, they did a study years ago. There was a South Pacific island that was going to get television for the first time. So what they did was, before they introduced television, they did a massive surveys of all the people on the island, women and men both. Then after 10 years around that area, 10 years of this television being on the island, they went back in and they studied responses. One of the biggest factors they found was this. Before television came, around 90 to 95% of the women on the island were satisfied with their body and how their body was. And after 10 years, around 60 or 70%, maybe even higher, of women on the island were not happy with their bodies or satisfied with the way their bodies were. So whatever you may want to say, please don't tell me there's no direct effect. Every research done really supports the fact there are some very direct effects on how people think. Okay, talks about, we're not going to get wholly into this, talks about postmodernism and epistemology, positivism, pragmatism. We're not going to get into all that right now. There's quantitative research versus qualitative research. Quantitative research says, okay, I'm going to show you this. I'm going to measure your attitude. I'm going to show you this, and I'm going to measure your attitude again, see if it's affected it. Again, most of those find there's an effect. Qualitative research says, I'm going to watch you and observe how you do things and study how you do things, and their focus groups, things like that, participant observation. And those things are more qualitative. We don't necessarily reach conclusions that are statistically going to be proven that way. Anyway, but that is the chapter on media theory and research, and I'll try to get this posted.